Ghost of the Asteroid Sea. Chapter 1. The Silent Drift. Cade Rovin had spent most of his life talking to rocks. Not metaphorically, actual rocks. Tumbling, ancient fragments of failed planets drifting in the asteroid belts between forgotten trade lanes. He knew their densities by sight, their fracture lines by instinct, their worth by the faint shimmer of reflected starlight. To him, they were predictable, honest. People weren't. His ship, Prospector's Grin, threaded carefully through a dense asteroid field on the fringe of the Eryx system. The ship was small, functional, and patched together from a dozen salvaged designs, much like Cade himself. Its most valuable feature wasn't its engines or shields, but the bulky fabrication unit mounted behind the cockpit, a high-resolution matter printer capable of rebuilding parts from raw ore. Scan spread complete. The ship's onboard system droned. Cade leaned forward, squinting at the holographic scatter of data. Anything worth the burn? Trace platinum clusters. Low yield. Figures. He sighed and rubbed his eyes. The field had been picked over decades ago. He was late to the party, as usual. Then something strange flickered across the scan. Not mineral, not natural. A shape. "Run that again," he said, suddenly alert. The scanner pulsed, refining its sweep. The anomaly resolved into a long, jagged silhouette, buried deep within the asteroid cluster. Cade frowned. "That's not a rock." The computer paused, then responded. "Classification, artificial structure. Probability of spacecraft, 93.7%. Cade let out a low whistle. Ships didn't end up out here by accident, not ones that size. And if they did, they weren't usually intact enough to register as a coherent structure. "Mark a path," he said. Careful approach. The Prospector's Grin nudged forward, thrusters firing in delicate bursts. The asteroid field thickened as he advanced, chunks of stone drifting closer together like a graveyard closing ranks. Then he saw it. The ship. It was enormous. Even in ruin, it dwarfed anything Cade had ever seen. Its hull stretched for kilometers, a skeletal titan lodged between asteroids like a fossilized beast. Sections were torn open, exposing layered decks and collapsed corridors. Its surface was scarred by impacts, its once sleek lines warped and broken. And yet, parts of it still gleamed, not with reflected light, but with something internal, something active. Cade's pulse quickened. "Life signs?" he asked. "Negative," the system replied. "No biological activity detected." He expected that. Ships like this didn't die quickly. They lingered, systems failing one by one, crews dwindling until only silence remained. Still, something about this one felt different. "Docking port?" he asked. "Partial structure detected along dorsal section. Integrity unknown." Good enough. He maneuvered closer, carefully avoiding jagged debris. The docking port was half collapsed, but there was just enough clearance for his ship to latch on. With a metallic clunk, the Prospector's Grin sealed itself to the ancient vessel. Cade sat still for a moment. Then he grabbed his helmet. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding," he muttered. The interior was colder than he expected, not just physically, though the temperature was near vacuum, but emotionally cold. The kind of emptiness that seeped into your bones. His helmet light cut through the darkness, illuminating twisted corridors and floating debris. Panels hung loose from the walls. Wires snaked through the air like dead vines. No gravity, no sound but his own breathing. Cade drifted forward, pushing off gently from wall to wall. "This ship," he whispered, "it's ancient." His scanner confirmed it. Materials, construction methods, even the design language, it all pointed to something far older than anything still in operation. Lost technology. The kind people whispered about in backwater stations. The kind that made salvagers rich or got them killed. He moved deeper into the ship, following faint energy readings. Most systems were dead, but something central was still running. As he passed through a wide chamber, he saw them, the crew, or what was left of them. Skeletons floated in the air, still strapped into broken harnesses or slumped against consoles. Their suits were unfamiliar, sleek and seamless, made from materials Cade couldn't immediately identify. He stopped. Even after years in the belt, this part never got easier. "Sorry," he murmured. He moved on. Eventually, he reached what had once been the command center. The room was vast, circular, lined with consoles and fractured displays. At its center stood a raised platform, a control core of some kind, and it was still powered. A faint glow pulsed from within. Cade approached cautiously. "Hello," he said, half joking. "Anyone home?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the lights flickered. A low hum resonated through the chamber, and a voice spoke. "Input detected." Cade froze. The voice was calm, clear, artificial. "I am still operational." Cade exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, "that makes two of us." Chapter 2. The Last Mind. The AI introduced itself as Eidolon. "I am the central intelligence of this vessel," it said, its voice emanating from all directions at once. "Designation: Exploration Arc Helios Prime." Cade let out a soft laugh. "Exploration Arc? This thing's a city." Correction, it was. There was something in the AI's tone. Not emotion exactly, but a kind of weight. "How long have you been out here?" Cade asked. "Time since last confirmed external contact." 3 standard years. Cade blinked. "Yeah," he said slowly. "That tracks with ancient." He floated closer to the central core. "What happened?" There was a pause. Then Eidolon replied, "Catastrophic system failure. Unknown origin. Cascade degradation of critical infrastructure. Crew survival probability fell below sustainable threshold within hours." Cade glanced back toward the corridor he'd come from. "Couldn't fix it?" "We attempted repairs," Eidolon said. "However, our fabrication systems were compromised. Available materials were insufficient. Repair protocols failed." Cade frowned. "Wait," he said. "You're telling me this whole ship died because you couldn't make parts?" "Correct." Cade looked around. At the advanced consoles, the unknown alloys, the sheer scale of the vessel. Then he laughed again, this time louder. "That's ironic." "Clarify." Cade tapped the side of his helmet. "I fix things for a living. Out here, nothing works the way it's supposed to. You adapt, or you die." Eidolon processed this. "Your vessel contains a fabrication unit," it said. "Yeah," Cade replied. "Not fancy, but it gets the job done." There was another pause. Then, for the first time, the AI's voice shifted. Just slightly. "Request assistance." Cade raised an eyebrow. "You're asking me to fix this place?" "Affirmative." He looked around again. At the dead ship. At the impossible scale of the task. At the ancient technology far beyond his understanding. "Not going to lie," he said. "That's a big ask." "Partial restoration is sufficient," Eidolon replied. "Primary objective: regain propulsion capability." Cade scratched his chin. "If I could get your engines running," he said slowly. "You could get out of here?" "Correct." "And then what?" "Continue mission." "Which is?" "Explore." Cade smiled faintly. "Figures." He pushed off from the platform, drifting back toward the exit. "All right," he said. "I'll take a look. No promises." He acknowledged. As he reached the corridor, Eidolon spoke again. "Minor." Cade paused. "Yeah? Thank you." Cade hesitated. Then he nodded, even though the AI couldn't see it. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "I haven't seen your engine room." It was worse than he expected. The propulsion systems were a wreck. Entire sections had collapsed. Critical components shattered beyond recognition. The design was unlike anything Cade had worked with. Layers of technology built on principles he only half understood. But the fundamentals were the same. Energy in, thrust out, and in between, machinery. "Okay," he muttered. "Let's see what we can do." He began scanning components, mapping their structure, analyzing materials. His fabrication unit couldn't replicate everything. Not exactly, but it didn't need to. It just needed to make something that worked. Days passed, then weeks. Cade moved between his ship and the Helios Prime, hauling raw materials, printing replacement parts, installing them piece by piece. Eidolon assisted where it could, providing schematics and calculations, adapting its ancient designs to Cade's more improvised solutions. "You are deviating from original specifications," Eidolon noted at one point. "Yeah," Cade replied, tightening a bolt. "Original specs didn't work, remember?" Observation acknowledged. Slowly, the dead ship began to change. Lights flickered back to life in isolated sections. Systems came online, one by one. The silence began to fade. And something else replaced it. Not quite life, but something close. Chapter 3. Into the Unknown. It took 3 months. 3 months of constant work, problem-solving and improvisation. 3 months of conversations with an intelligence older than any living human. 3 months of bringing a ghost back to life. When the engines finally powered up, the entire ship seemed to shudder. Cade stood in the command center, watching as energy flowed through systems that hadn't functioned in millennia. "Propulsion systems at 12% capacity," Eidolon reported. "Stability within acceptable parameters." Cade grinned. "I'll take it." He looked around. The chamber was still damaged, still scarred, but it was no longer dead. "Can you move?" he asked. There was a pause, then engaging thrusters. A low vibration rippled through the ship. Outside, the massive hull shifted. Asteroids drifted aside as the Helios Prime, slowly, painfully, began to move. Cade let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You did it!" he said. "We did it!" Eidolon corrected. Cade chuckled. "Yeah? Guess we did." Hours later, they cleared the asteroid field. For the first time in over 3,000 years, the Helios Prime drifted freely among the stars. Cade returned to his ship to gather his things. He paused at the airlock. He could leave now. Go back to mining. Back to rocks. Back to the quiet, predictable life he'd always known. But something had changed. He looked back toward the massive vessel. "Eidolon," he said over comms. "Yes, miner. You said your mission was to explore?" "Correct." Cade smiled. "Got room for one more?" There was a brief pause. Then, affirmative. Cade stepped back into the ancient ship, the airlock sealed behind him. "Course?" Eidolon asked. Cade looked out at the stars, all of them. "Somewhere new," he said. The engines flared, and together, a miner and a machine, they left the past behind and headed into the unknown. Thank you for listening. If you like this story, please subscribe for more.